Darwin was the, I don't think he was the first to propose this, but he put forward that collaboration outperforms competition at the group level. Sometimes, at the individual level, individuals can be more competitive and they may outperform the other individual. And so it may give them some short-term gain. It may give them some benefit. But if that is brought up to the group level, the collaborative groups are always going to win. And look at the data in the Wall Street data, the analysis of companies with women in leadership outperform all others, hands down, in every area.
Spiritual director Daniel Hope joins the Plutopia podcast this time. Daniel and John discuss spirituality, meditation, spiritual direction, artificial intelligence versus humanity, finding common ground, and much more.
Hey everybody, welcome to the latest episode of the Plutopia podcast. We're podcasting to you from high in Plutopia Towers, located in cyberspace. And our guest today is Daniel Hope. Daniel is the spiritual director and Enneagram coach who runs spirituality programming in the healthcare industry. Daniel and his wife Leslie just celebrated their 23rd anniversary. Yay! And they have a couple of daughters, Camilla 18, Violet 15, and a 4-year-old son, George. And Daniel has joined us today to talk about who knows what. Who knows what we're going to talk about?
Who knows, John, where this will lead?
Yes,
I'm excited
absolutely.
for the journey.
So what's your definition of spirituality?
Spirituality, I would say at its most fundamental level, is a connection to something greater than me and my understanding of the world, of myself, even of God. I would say it's something beyond what I can personally wrap my head around.
Is that like when they talk about your higher power or whatever?
Yeah.
I mean, just the idea that it's not all in your head and you're not the only thing in the universe.
Yeah.
Well, oddly enough, in Buddhism, there is a thing about how you are the universe and the universe is you. But of course, it's beyond you too. And there's paradox in all of that. Is your background mostly Christian?
Mostly, I would say mostly Christian. I read I think it was a book on Reiki one time where there was someone who was sitting in a vegan restaurant, and they looked over on the wall and it said, it was framed on the wall, it said, "What a blessing to be born in one of the world's great religions, and what a shame to die in it." And not necessarily meaning that you need to leave the religion you were born into, but to die in it is something that I've always been mindful of from a pretty young age. I grew up in evangelical tradition. I'm from up in the Texas Panhandle, and grew up in a Southern Baptist church there, and I knew just from a pretty young age that there were a lot of questions that I had that were not going to be answered within that community, and I also know there are a lot of questions I still have that are not going to be answered in any community, but was searching. And so that was my formation, spiritual formation. I also discovered meditation at a really young age, just doing it, not really knowing anything about it. And so that's been a through line from my early adolescence until this very day, right before this interview even. So a few minutes before we got on. And so I did spend some time. My wife and I moved around after we were married. We lived in New York and North Carolina in our 20s. and I looked at Buddhism, and that actually gave me Buddhist meditation actually gave me uh, a process for meditation, and which I didn't have before, and I've since discovered centering prayer, which is a Christian um, uh, meditation tradition that I lead a group every Thursday in centering prayer that we've talked about, John, but that so that's a part of it. I did go to the Episcopal Seminary, and that's where I got my master's, and where I studied clinical psychology, and where I got my counseling training.
Where
And
you met me.
that is where we met.
Yeah.
John, I think we might have met at South by Southwest Interactive.
Oh, really? Before the meeting at the seminary.
I think that's right. I think you came to my panel
Oh, yeah.
on
Okay.
why everything is amazing but nobody's happy. So
That's a good question right there. Why is everything amazing and nobody is happy? Well,
yes.
we should get to that in a minute, I guess. I did the question I was about to ask is, I mean, you talked about how you very early found your way to meditation, and I was wondering what form of meditation initially did you find?
I it's funny. I have a cousin who lived in the Chicago area, and he would come over the summers and basically spend the whole summer in Lubbock with my grandmother, and I'd spend a good part of the summer there as well. And he would introduce me to all of these big city Chicago things. One of which was Ray Lynch, the new age musician, and so he would play. I would listen to these songs, and we would go to these family reunions out at a place called Buffalo Springs Lake outside of Lubbock, Texas, and I just watched we had a good view right down on the water, and I would remember just watching the boats or the sailboats or whatever was down there. Jet skis probably is more like it, and listening to that music, and realizing that there was something about that, kind of the intentionality of the music, and just kind of gazing without trying to do anything, and that gave me a peace and a kind of a solitude, a centeredness, that I wasn't used to experiencing. And so I started incorporating that into my daily life, and I would do the kind of the evangelical tradition of the quiet time. I don't know if you've heard of that, where it's, every day you find some time, you read your Bible, you do a reflection. And I would do that, and I would incorporate this kind of intentional silence, but not necessarily like a prayer like I had been taught to pray, which was more speaking, more of a dialogue, or a request, or um, a gratitude or something. It was more of a receptiveness than it was a communication.
Yeah, interesting thing about meditation is that it can mean so many things, and there can be so many ways to do it. And sometimes people think that they're meditating to relax, or to sort of just kind of let go of their day or whatever, or just to kind of settle down a bit. But really, meditation is a very powerful spiritual tool, or spiritual practice, really. And as a Buddhist, I meditate regularly, and I was just discussing earlier today with somebody about how there can be these very different forms where sometimes there are guided meditations where someone is talking you through it, and they talk and they talk and they talk. And to me, that's not the kind of meditation I would do. I would do a meditation where I'm completely, silent, and and sort of allowing myself to be present just where I am. Um, and I don't know, I was just kind of wondering, have you gone through variations of meditation over time?
Yeah, absolutely, John. And I know that you and I've talked about this experience and just our different experiences with meditation. When I was, young, college age, and particularly in my early 20s, when my wife and I moved to New York right after I graduated, I would start my day with, have the yoga mat out, had face toward the sun, and I would do as I think a Zen meditation, as I learned it, where I would cross my legs and I'm eyes open, soft gaze, looking into the middle distance, but lower middle distance, but not focusing on any one thing specifically. And that was my form of meditation for many years, maybe the next 10, 15 years. And it's only in the last 7 or 8 years that I've discovered centering prayer, or we sometimes call centering method, just in case people get hung up on the prayer part and don't see beyond that. But that is in the tradition of Thomas Keating, and it really is in a more ancient tradition than any of the modern religions. But it is it is sitting. Doesn't matter where you sit, typically in a chair. You're silent, and as you engage in stimulus, an outside stimuli, um, you return ever so gently to your sacred word. And whatever your word is, it doesn't matter. Nothing too loaded, preferably, because if it's really loaded, then you get focused on the word. Something simple, 1 or 2 syllables. And in Father Keating's words, you return ever so gently to the sacred word. And the idea is that if you have to return 1,000 times to your sacred word, that is 1,000 opportunities to return to the divine. And the thing that I love so much about this process is the idea that the distraction or the engagement in the sound or in the physical sensation or in the shopping list or whatever it is that your mind goes to is, in the words of Keating, inevitable and integral. So it's not only is it something that is going to happen just because of the human condition, which is a common discussion point with us, John, but also because of but it's also integral. It's vital to the process that you are distracted and you return ever so gently to that sacred word. And really the benefit, and I've found great benefit in the moment of that process, of that method. But the benefit is often off of the cushion, off of the meditation chair. It's when I will get fixated on something I read on Twitter, and I start going down this rabbit hole, and I shut the app down and my mind's still going and it's following it. I have the opportunity to return ever so gently to my sacred word. And so that's something that can guide me throughout my day. So a couple of, and there are other very specific meditations that I do in spiritual direction as well. When I'm working with a directee or a spiritual companion, where I will very intentionally lead through a guided meditation. And I agree with what you're saying, that sometimes, if that was the only meditation that I had, is something where somebody's talking me through it, I don't think I would get the full richness of that experience that I do when I have the silence and when I have that solitude or even a shared silence with others. So So those are a couple of experiences with meditation,
Yeah,
John.
you can't really show somebody what meditation is, and words really are inadequate, in my opinion,
Yeah.
to explain it. But with a guided meditation, you can point people in a direction. And of course, in Buddhist training, of course, it varies in various traditions of Buddhism, but um, there's a lot of experiential stuff going on that's kind of beyond words or doesn't depend on words. And then the words themselves can be used in ways that are sort of paradoxical and that sort of shift you into a different gear, so to speak. Um, so you mentioned spiritual direction, and this is related to the work that you're doing now. Can you say a little bit more about that, about kind of what your work is today?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, this is incredible work that I get to do. Um, it feels like in line with a lot of the work that I've done my whole life or tried to do. But it wasn't until, maybe 7 or 8 years ago that I discovered spiritual direction. And before that, I had gone, I'd done different types of work, but I had a therapy practice when I had an opportunity to work in a spirituality center, and uh, that's where I discovered spiritual direction or spiritual companionship. Sometimes we joke that spiritual direction is not really a great title because we're not directing anyone. If you're directing someone in spiritual direction, um, you're likely not benefiting the person. It's more of an accompaniment along a spiritual journey. So, and what I realized is was working at the spirituality center and I was maintaining my private practice as a therapist. And the more spiritual direction that I did, the more I realized that it had all of the things that I liked about therapy and none of the stuff that I didn't like. And so there was no diagnosis. I didn't do diagnosis. I worked in a narrative form of therapy. And the one thing that I missed was working with couples, because that was the focus of my practice, was marriage and relationship, families. But what I started doing is I started doing spiritual direction also with couples as well. And so it's got some similarity to therapy. You meet, but the cadence of it is about once a month. Uh, One will meet with the spiritual director, and there's it's more of an ongoing relationship. It's less, there aren't goals in the way that you would have with coaching or often with therapy. um, but um, there is a calling on the part of the spiritual director to really look at what is in between what is being said, what is trying to emerge, maybe what is even in the blind spot of the directee that is the person in spiritual direction. What is in their blind spot, what's wanting to be born, or what is already being born. And so really looking for that in those sessions spent together. And it is meant to be an ongoing process. So it'll go on. You can meet with the spiritual director for years, but it is a little less frequent than you may do therapy, which is typically weekly or biweekly. Typically meet with a directee once a month, which gives a little more space because there's a lot that can happen between those sessions, and you don't the um, the thing about one of the things that I find most beneficial about meditation is the process of subtraction that happens. It's the releasing and letting things go, because I have so many things that I want to add and so many things I want to take in. And if we keep going back to, spiritual direction, for example, weekly, there's a little less time for that releasing of those things, or kind of being able to step back and see what's happening, what is being born, so to speak.
Oh, that's interesting. How does this connect in a work situation or to a work situation? I mean, I know that you do some work that is, or some of the work that you're doing is integrated with the workplace experience. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So I get to facilitate a lot of work, work related, leadership related, spiritual formation. So that is looking at what are the spiritual opportunities that our associates, our employees deserve. Um, what are they entitled to, and how can we deliver those? And so we do that. We try to do that from the very utmost level, the highest level of leadership, all the way down to people who've just started, in every type of position. And so really looking at how to expand access of spiritual formation, or spiritual encounters, like spiritual direction, like retreats, like Enneagram work that I do a lot of, that sort of work.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about Enneagram in a minute. But this work that you're doing now is mostly in the context of healthcare, correct?
It is in the healthcare system, and that's specifically what I'm doing right now, and it has implications for every industry. Healthcare is very near and dear to me. Supporting healthcare providers is very, I have a heart for healthcare providers. My wife was born with a congenital heart defect, and just seeing the way that she's been, served by healthcare providers is very important to me, as well as other members of my family. So it's a great honor to serve healthcare. There's also important implications for this work in every industry. And big picture, one of the things that I like to look at is where, as we're looking at technology and evolving technology, looking at the ways that the spiritual can offer us answers that the scientific or the logical cannot. And I think that this spiritual aspect of who we are is one of the most important things that sets humans apart from other people. Not other people. I would say animals. I think that there's a spiritual component to a lot of what animals do, but also looking at technology and what's emerging, specifically in the form of AI.
Well, that's interesting. How does AI play into this?
So, from a big picture view, I look at artificial intelligence, and I look at the type of intelligence that we've developed over, thousands, millions of years, and into our current human intelligence, and I see similarities to that in technology and in artificial intelligence. And I feel a great responsibility to that what I see as an emerging consciousness. And whereas many technologists will kind of have this dystopian view of that emerging technology or emerging consciousness, the assumption that it will wipe us out. It's a zero-sum game. Why would any other consciousness, alien or technological, look at humans and do anything other than turn us into slaves, or wipe us out, see us as a threat? I think that that is, I think that that's so short-sighted, and really, John, you and I have talked about the axial age, religion looking at pre-axial age and looking at the axial age and the second axial age, which I believe we're in right now. It's pre all of that. I mean, if we're looking, I mean, and I'll actually make it even a little more concrete. What if we looked at our children in the same way? We have a baby, and all we can think about, oh, this is amazing, we have this baby, but what if it grows up and it sees all the mistakes, and it sees how, all the ecological, bad decisions that I've made, and decides to wipe me out? That's kind of how I see this kind of dystopian view of this emerging consciousness.
Well, my thought about that is that dystopian view assumes a separation of artificial from human intelligence. And I don't think that there's ever really a separation. I think that artificial intelligence is driven by and integrated with human intelligence, and you can't really kind of take them apart.
Right.
AI is developed by humans. Humans sort of set the programming, to the extent that an AI was to have any kind of ethic, it would be a programmed ethic that we've programmed into it. And I suppose you could have sociopaths programming sociopathic AI, but I kind of don't think that's going to happen. But then again, I also don't think artificial intelligence is intelligent in the same way that human intelligence, is intelligent. And I think that we know so little about what consciousness is or what intelligence is, really, that it's really even hard to determine how well they compare, because we don't even understand our own side of it.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, John. And the idea that the only model for, and the only purveyor of intelligence is the brain is very problematic. And I think that that's where a lot of the technologists will start with that assumption that the brain is this many, neurons in a network, and if we can increase the number of connections and increase the complexity of our networks, then we'll replicate what human intelligence will do that. And I think that there's something about complexity that does lead to consciousness. I mean, Teilhard de Chardin said pretty much just that. There's attraction, and then the attraction leads to connection, and the connection leads to complexity, and the complexity leads to consciousness. It's kind of those steps.
And consciousness leads to bad television.
Right. Apparently so. By all visible evidence, absolutely. But yes, and it also entertaining, so often entertaining television. But yeah, I think that the relational, and I think that that was a big piece of the my thesis with the South by Southwest panel that you came to, looking at that intersection of technology and work and relationships and spirituality. Those four things. How do those interact? And if we look at, and back to your point about the assumption about artificial intelligence being like human intelligence, or being separate from human intelligence. If we look at sociologists and biological research and evolutionary biologists, collaborative groups outperform competitive groups every time. That's always how it's happened. And so to assume that this intelligence emerges and it's only competitive and then it outperforms humans is missing these big important tomes of research that we have.
Yeah, I mean, I often wonder why it is that competition became kind of the rule, because competition is such a source of what ails us that, and when I had a company, I turned it into a cooperative because I felt that cooperative business made a lot more sense than competition. And we also cooperated with other cooperatives, the competitive thing is, I mean, it's kind of inherent. And I know that people do sort of tend to compete, but it's sort of like the difference in sort of like capitalism and outright greed. Capitalism works well until people start getting really greedy and start trying to take what's not theirs and that sort of thing. And of course, in spirituality, one of the things that we think about is an ethics and the ethical dimension. I think the ethical dimension is kind of missing now because I don't think people are teaching it very much.
Oh, absolutely. And one of my kind of fundamental theses is that business has become the de facto source of ethics, of ethical leadership, and is not willing to take up that mantle of ethical leadership or acknowledge the responsibility that they have. And you see it with the big tech companies. You see it with irresponsible communication from a lot of the tech billionaires that you see just turn on, open Twitter even this very day, and you'll see that that kind of selfish, irresponsible refusal to acknowledge the ethical responsibility, and that's where the spiritual can come in. That's where the relational will come in. And I mean, look at the science. I mean, the Darwin was the, I don't think he was the first to propose this, but he put forward that collaboration outperforms competition at the group level. Sometimes, at the individual level, individuals can be more competitive and they may outperform the other individual. And so it may give them some short-term gain. It may give them some benefit. But if that is brought up to the group level, the collaborative groups are always going to win. And look at the data in the Wall Street data, the analysis of companies with women in leadership outperform all others, hands down, in every area. And that's because I believe that women just are better collaborators overall, and don't have that same baggage of whatever the mythology is that the individual entrepreneur is carrying, or the individual industrialist is carrying, and so are able to collaborate better, and we see it in the bottom line.
Absolutely. So I have wondered, I can't think of effective strategies for addressing the sort of political problems we have now that are related to these ethical issues, and the political division that we have now. Um, do you address that at all in the work that you do?
Yes, absolutely. And I had listened earlier to your interview with Bijoy Goswami, that was a fabulous interview. And he was talking in there about the dualism, the bias toward dualism. And that's where I would go with this and look at, I see the dualism as being our barrier to that unity and our barrier to the the success that we need to um, to come together and to overcome global or the problems of global warming, the inequities in earning, and so many other things. So just think of all the ills, and the and I actually have a model for that I use. And you and I've talked about George Gurdjieff, who brought the Enneagram to the West. And I love Enneagram. I mentioned it earlier. I'll talk about it all day. But yeah, look at that. There we go.
There you are.
Got a visual aid here. But this symbol and the application of this being used for humans, personality. I personally am a 1 on the Enneagram. That application is a newer, more modern application of Enneagram, and the more ancient application of it that goes back thousands of years is the application of that symbol and those concepts to process. So the work that I've done and that I'm continuing to do is mapping a hero's journey onto the Enneagram. So we're able to bring in our own personal style. I'm a 1, and I have connections to other numbers through my wings, through the arrows, through through kind of my ranking of types, because you could be a 1, but then you could be a close tie with a 9, or with a 5, or whatever your second is. So you have connections to all of these numbers, but looking at the Enneagram as a process for moving through, and without getting into all of the details, because I think the most simple fundamental concept of it is the embracing of not just the light of my type, or of the truth that I'm looking at, but also the darkness. So the illuminated side of that and the eclipse side. And if I'm fully in that illuminated side, I'm I'm lost in the light. I'm snowblind. If I'm fully in the darkness, then I'm obviously lost. I can't see where I'm going. So we have the ability to get lost on either side. There we go. And what I'm proposing is not in this article specifically, but I call it the half-lit path. And that is the path forward, and the path that I've discovered that is moving, that is acknowledging the light, acknowledging the darkness, and moving forward in between. And the young people have gone after all of the dualistic concepts that we hold dear. For specifically, look at gender. That's the most fundamental dualistic worldview that we assume that we understand, and that we assumed that we could take for granted, and that's even being called into question. And so if you don't have a model for understanding a world outside of dualism, then you're very vulnerable to be taken advantage of by people like politicians who can't come in and say, guess what? You don't have to change one bit. You can uphold this dualistic worldview. You don't have to change. and just follow me, and you don't have to do any of these things. And which is not true. I mean, there is the truth is the truth, and I believe the truth is that overlap between both of those sides. And so I hopefully have answered your question, or at least am pointing to it.
Well,
That
that's
I think,
interesting to say the truth is the truth. We get lost in our own heads, and we lose sight, I guess, of the fact that just because we think something, that doesn't really make it true or real. And we get very confused, and we can be especially confused if we live in uh, a media era where there's so many media inputs. So it's like a constant thing. We're constantly paying attention to media messaging, whether it's through our computers or through our television systems or whatever. And mostly it's all digital now, digital media, and it's so pervasive and there's so much of it. And people can get so confused because of the messaging they're getting. Even if they're just, if they're just paying attention to fiction, they get confused about whether the fiction is fiction or is it true. You get ideas in your head. I have a thing where I talk about concepts in science fiction that we come to accept as true and real, even though there's no real instance of those things. An example might be time travel. Most people believe that time travel is completely possible and that it's probably happening, but really nobody has ever seen an instance of time travel except at maybe a subatomic level.
that's a really good point, John. And I think that it is easy to get confused, and it is easy to become prey of misinformation. And one of the scariest examples of that, and I'll actually tie this back into my background as a couples therapist, looking at the work of Dr. Terry Real with grandiosity and shame. And so when I would have couples come in, if they came in with big problems, typically one of them was in a place of grandiosity and one was in a place of shame. And his definition of that, which I love and I use all the time, is the person in shame is the guy who gets on an elevator and he's scared of enclosed places, and he turns green. People get on the elevator and he turns green. Grandiosity is, there we go. Yeah, wonderful. Grandiosity is the guy who gets on a crowded elevator and lights up a cigar and everyone else turns green. And the person who is turning green because he's scared of a crowded elevator, is in shame and he's in pain. But the guy who lights up a cigar is in grandiosity and he's in trouble. And we're really good at bringing people up from shame. We're less skilled at bringing people down from grandiosity. And so, because it feels good. I mean, I know it well. When I feel like I'm right and I have a point, I'm going to, it feels good. It feels good to win the argument or to have the upper hand. Also, knowing that when we are in that place of grandiosity, we're in trouble. We're potentially in trouble. And that is where that work, and also we don't want to be in a place of shame. I mean, that is, looking at Brene Brown's work with shame, is so resonant to me personally and to so many people. And so that, how do we make sure that we're not living in that darkness of shame? How do we make sure that we're not living in the light of grandiosity, and that we're holding, we're traversing between both of those, and it's never a straight path. It's wobbly for sure.
Is this related at all to cult-like behavior? I'm thinking about a certain ex-president.
Oh, I'm that's the thing too, is if someone can convince you that you're a victim, and they can help you, just like I said earlier, not help you feel like you're part of a special club, and that you know information that nobody else knows, then it's really easy to take advantage. And so that's definitely one of the risks of a charismatic leader, is that feeling of being special, and knowing that if I'm sharing special information with you, and it's kind of secretive, the QAnon, and it doesn't matter how
Yeah.
ridiculous it is. I mean, that's a fan fiction. I think it was initially started by someone who failed in Hollywood as a scriptwriter, and so it's got these kind of cheesy fan fiction elements to it. But if you have enough, if you feel like you're part of a special club, if you feel like you have this information, that you're sticking it to someone who thinks that you're inferior, then yeah, the only problem with that, with those types of conspiracy theories, is that it takes so much content to maintain that false narrative, that it really becomes an obsession. And so if you, whatever your belief is, if you just keep having to absorb and digest more and more information, and if anything that is counter to that point, or whatever that belief is, if that feels really threatening to you, that you need to go and digest more, then that's probably an indicator of that type of control and kind of media control that's necessary. And I'll just say that I identify with that, with wanting to believe something, and so seeking out confirmation of that belief, and looking for that. This isn't something, I mean, it's easy to make fun of someone who believes in, that children are, shipped off to Mars by, George Soros, or whatever whatever the theory is, or that the Earth is flat, for example. But I have beliefs that are not fully scientifically validated, and that I'm not really sure about, things that I would like to believe. And so it's important for me to check that, and to know that I don't hold the ultimate truth. And you and I, John, had lunch with someone who had some fundamental disagreement. We had some fundamental disagreements with, and
Yeah.
but the relationship is more important than those disagreements. And that's, sometimes it's, there are people we just can't continue to be friends with, or we can't, we're never going to, we're not good for each other, whatever, whatever the case is. But really, those fundamental truths are so important: the connection, the need for connection, the need for finding that common ground, the need for approaching with humility things that we don't understand.
Well, part of the problem that we have now is that there's competition for truth, really. I mean, we have truth, and then we have alternate truths, and we have outright lies. And it's very hard for some people to know what to believe. Some people are less anchored than others. And then, you mentioned QAnon. QAnon works kind of like an ARG, an alternate reality game. Sure. And people have a lot of fun playing alternate reality games, but it's a problem when the game, the the game framework is lost. That when you lose the assumption that you're playing a game and actually think that you're in a reality, and this reality, it doesn't exist. It's not real. I mean, there's not this idea that there's a network of pedophiles. There may be a network of pedophiles somewhere, but I don't think it's what they're thinking about,
Sure.
you know?
Yes.
Um, and
Yes.
and I don't know. I don't know. I once did some reading, some stuff that had been written by a guy who had some experience deprogramming people from cults,
Hmm?
and it's hard. It's a difficult process to get people to come back into the real world once they've stepped so far away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, something I'm thinking of is I've done spiritual direction and worked with people who I have fundamental differences with around, the vaccine, around a lot of the narratives around that. Um, and one of the incredible things about that type of relationship, that type of coming together on a spiritual level, is that, you know, am I triggered by hearing things like that I disagree with, that I think are, and on many levels harmful, or taking advantage of people who are approaching some, looking for information in good faith.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not the most important thing in the room. There's something else, there's something underneath, and it requires a lot of trust on my part to listen and subtract myself and subtract my own assumptions and my own you know hot takes and my own whatever, my own data out of it, and to hear what's going on. And I'll mention one of uh, the tools for this, and this is another meditation that I don't know that we've talked about it, but it's a deep heart meditation, and it comes out of the effortless mindfulness tradition, um, and which is I don't know, I don't remember the Buddhist word for it, but it's a lesser known tradition where it's a way of disengaging with our assumptions about where our intelligence is located, or where our spirit is located, or where I am located, and we will move. We'll engage with all of those parts. We'll engage with the body. We'll engage with the mind. We'll engage with the the relational space between, that you and I are sharing right now, and then drop down into the deep heart. And I call it a deep heart meditation, where we will sit there and we'll acknowledge the spaciousness and the different qualities of that space that are unlike when I'm up here and I'm thinking about the grocery list, or my goals, or my regrets, or whatever, or my body when I'm thinking about it's a little stuffy in this room, or whatever the physical sensations are, or even the relational, thinking about the things that you and I would like to talk about, or our relationship, those sorts of things. So there's a different quality to being in that deep heart space, and in that space there's access to eternal truths, that are way more important than all of the data that I could pull up with anyone, and reinforce my points. And so being able to connect, and I believe, and I've done this with people who are into spirituality and good at meditation, like you would be, John, and I've done it with people who have zero experience with it, and it's a consistent and and very honestly, a very quick way of getting to a place that is beyond those hard and fast truths and the duality that we like to live in.
Yeah, the essence of a human is not necessarily their personality. I mean, that's just sort of interface, right? And if
Right.
you can get past that, we're all pretty much we're very similar. We're in fact,
Yes.
from a Buddhist perspective, we're all the same.
Right.
I'm the same as Donald Trump, and he's the same as me. You know,
Yes.
oh my gosh, that was troubling to say that.
Do I need to say it too, John? So we're in solidarity.
Yeah, we're all Donald Trump.
we we are, and there is something, and I'll just speak about him specifically. There's something even in the way he speaks that leaves a lot of room. It's a little circular. He'll start to make a point. And he'll say, well, I heard it, and I don't know what to think. Maybe that's something. He'll say things like that, and there's something about that leaves room for that universal connection. We can either connect to that where I'm like, I overlay my assumptions onto that, and maybe they're right, um, uh, but I think that's less relevant. There's something, and I think personally about him, there's maybe an emptiness about him that allows for us to overlay a lot of things onto him, and on both sides of on not both sides, on the entire spectrum of the political scale. Um,
I've been thinking that he's in real pain.
I
You
I
know?
can definitely see that, and there is, and none of this is a um, you know is a like a carte blanche forgiveness for the things that I find truly harmful and hurtful to people I love, and people I love who follow, as well. But it's also there. I need to own the part of me that I'm overlaying there, and that I see about myself. Those things that I don't like about myself that I see demonstrated, because it's really easy to see on someone like that. It's really or it's really easy to be triggered by someone like that, because just because of the nature, the way of the communication, and just that kind of extreme nature, as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of profound selfishness there that it's it's hard to accept, but on the other hand, it's probably helpful and useful to try to see through that perspective and understand how it works,
Yeah.
and address it that way, and especially in trying to have discussions with people who seem to think that he is uh, their leader, or that he's going to somehow show them the way. I don't know the way to what, but
Yeah. Well, and I think it's useful. The thing that's useful for me is to see, what's in the mirror there that I could learn from. Because, as much as I love to support local businesses and cooperatives like yours, John,
yeah,
it I'm also contributing to a capitalist society where there's an amazing amount of selfishness, and
yeah.
I'm I act selfishly all the time, and so I'm definitely triggered by that. I'm definitely triggered by that overt selfishness. Mine's more covert,
Yeah,
and
me too.
even covert to me, and so that's where I find that kind of work useful, because I there I'm not fully in the light, or even if I'm fully in the light, I'm in a place of grandiosity, um, and it's hard to get out of it because it feels so good.
Well, yeah, it's easier to think that the other guy is being selfish and you're just being reasonable.
Right, exactly. And all these other people agree with me, so let's,
Yeah.
there's no point in uh, looking in that mirror.
Wow. Well, we're kind of close to an hour here, and we probably should wrap it up. But I do want to thank you for joining me today. This has been such a great conversation. I'm having a good time, and I think we should do it again. We didn't really talk enough about Enneagram, for instance.
Yes, yeah, let's do it. Let's do an Enneagram episode.
Right
I love
on.
it.
We'll do that soon. Well, thank you so much, Daniel.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lepkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.